In this video, I want to talk through 4 things that you need to do before signing off any mix. These are things to do before you send this off for mastering, and if you miss them out or you mess them up in some way, then it can absolutely 100% have an impact on the final result. So let's dive in. We've got a mix open here, we're pretty much done with it, and I'm going to talk you through those final checks before we export it, before it goes off to the mastering engineer. Now, number 1 is making sure that the mix is the best that it possibly can be. We're not going to rely on mastering to fix things for us. We're going to fix them right now before we export it. Let's just take a quick listen to a small section of this song, figure out if there's anything that we want to change. So at this point, it's a good idea to listen to your mix from start to finish, maybe with a notepad and a pen, write down anything that you don't like, and then you can go through and you can address each one of them individually. So maybe after listening to it, you think there's a bit too much bass, there's a bit too much low end, it's a bit muddy, a bit boomy. Well, deal with that now. Maybe you just need to drop the bass guitar. Maybe you need to carve some more low end out of the guitars, or the drums, the kick drum, for example. Maybe the vocals are a little bit sibilant. That's something that I actually thought with this mix when I was listening through and doing my final checks. So I put this de-esser on. I'm just taking about 2 or 3 dB off the S's. The point is, anything that's jumping out, standing out, anything we can hear needs fixing, we're going to fix it right now. We want to send the mastering engineer our best possible mix, not something that they have to open up and start dealing with problems. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is the mix bus. Now, there's some terrible advice being disseminated in certain corners of the internet that says if you have mixed through, let's say, an EQ or a compressor on your mix bus, then you should disable that before sending it to your mastering engineer. This is insane, because if you have got an EQ on your mix bus, as you can see, I've got a Pultec EQ right here, then you have made certain decisions in the mix based on listening to it through that EQ with whatever boost cuts that you've got. So now if we disable that, the entire mix is going to change. It makes absolutely no sense to do that. Similarly, if you've mixed through a compressor, which I have, I've got the Slate FG Red, the Focusrite Red 3 compressor here, compression can alter the internal balances of the mix, which, as a mix engineer, that is what you have spent hours very, very carefully crafting. So if we disable the mix bus compressor, we're undoing a lot of that hard work. This is also a reason that when I mix a song, I choose to compress the mix bus, because compression does alter those internal balances, and that is my job, that is your job as a mixing engineer to craft. And I would prefer to send my mix off to a mastering engineer and for them to do no compression or very minimal, because I know that that's going to alter some of those internal balances. And I don't want to get a mix back from mastering that sounds wildly different than what I sent. That's not to say that mastering engineers won't and shouldn't compress. They absolutely should in some circumstances. But generally, I don't want to be hearing massive, drastic changes coming back from mastering, because that either means that the mastering engineer hasn't done a great job at their end, or if they've had to make such massive changes to the mix, I haven't done my job, you haven't done your job as a mixing engineer. So let's take a listen to this mix, and I'm going to disable everything that's on the mix bus. You can see that I've got a few things bypassed. That's just stuff that I decided in the mix I didn't want. So this is an SSL compressor. I decided to go with the Focusrite. I also have a Pultec EQ. This is the UAD Pultec. I decided in the end to go with the Slate Pultec on this mix. So that's the reason that they're out. Down here, we've just got a limiter, which is just bringing the level up, and this is for me to be able to get the audio to the video right now, so we're going to leave those on. But all of the EQ, the compression, I've got some tape saturation. Let's see what happens when we remove all of that.
Turn these wrongs into rights.
Now take it off.
Turn these wrongs into rights. I'm feeling you simple way. All I have left is you. And I can't
And back on.
but think it's true that you're trying to find someone new.
and off.
'Cause all I have left is you.
So that is not a subtle difference. As you can hear, when we remove all the processing that we've done on the mix bus, the mix changes massively. Why would we disable that when we're sending it to the mastering engineer? We're essentially sending them an approximation of what the mix is. It doesn't make sense to do that. So if you've EQ'd, if you've compressed, if you put tape on the master bus, that has influenced the decisions in your mix. So leave it on. Now, the third thing we're going to talk about is the one exception to this rule, and it's limiting. On the mix bus, we have Pro L2. This is the last thing in the chain on the mix bus, and it's just a limiter, which is bringing the volume of the mix up to a decent level, like it would be after mastering. Very often, usually right towards the end of a mix, I'll put a limiter like Pro L2 on. The reason that I do that is so I can hear how the mix is responding to limiting. And again, it's an option to tweak anything. So if certain elements are starting to distort a little bit too soon, if the limiter is absolutely crushing the mix and you're not getting much gain reduction, then there's obviously some issues in the mix, and it's just the opportunity for you to tweak that and make sure that after limiting, the mix still holds and it still sounds great. I also like to send a limited mix out to my clients, to the artists, for them to listen to and go through the revision process, because it's more like the level it will be after mastering, and I just find that it helps the process go a little bit smoother. However, before I export this mix, before I send it to mastering, I am going to disable the limiter. And this is because if your mix is limited hard, then you're massively tying the hands of the mastering engineer. You're restricting their ability to process it in a way that they might want to or need to. So if you've got a limiter on your mix, it's probably best to take that off, or at least have a conversation with your mastering engineer, or maybe even send them a limited version along with a version without the limiter on, just so that they can hear what you've been listening to, what the mix sounds like, the limited mix sounds like, that's been approved by the artist. A lot of master engineers that I know and I've worked with quite appreciate that as an insight. Now, the fourth thing we need to talk about is headroom. Again, there is lots of really terrible advice circulating the internet about what level you should be submitting your mix to a mastering engineer. So we've taken the limiter off. We're going to listen to the mix at the loudest part, and we're just going to watch the meter. We don't want it to be hitting digital 0. Now, many people online will tell you that your mix must be hitting -6. I've even heard of some mastering engineers wanting mixers from their clients at -6, which to me is insane. And if a mastering engineer is telling you that you must be submitting your mix to them at -6, you should fire them, because genuinely they don't know what they're talking about. It's just complete rubbish. Now, there is a caveat to this. Obviously, we don't want to be sending a mix that's super quiet. So if your level is way down and way too low, then that's not great practice, because it's going to be too close to the noise floor. In digital, if you've got nice clean recordings, the noise floor should be so low that it makes very little difference anyway. But generally, what I'm going to be looking for is that the mix is probably somewhere above 10, but not hitting 0. In between those two numbers, it really doesn't matter. If it's peaking at -8, fine. If it's peaking at -3, -2, even -1, fine. It really, really doesn't matter. If it's going above 0, then you are clipping and you're potentially introducing some distortion. If the mastering engineer gets your mix and they need more headroom, they can very easily just clip gain it down. It takes less than 5 seconds to do that. Similarly, if they need more gain to go into whatever processing they're going to do, they can clip gain it up. Again, it takes a couple of seconds. So it's really not a big deal. So let's take a listen to this mix. Let's see where it is peaking. So that's perfect. As you can see, we were fairly consistently above 10 and we maxed out at -2.8. That is a perfectly reasonable level to send to the mastering engineer. So I'm not going to worry about getting it to a certain figure. I'm not going to worry about getting that down to -6 or getting it to whatever arbitrary figure. It's good. It's plenty loud enough. It's not too low that it's near the noise floor. but it's not clipping. It's good to go. Now, the final thing that we need to consider, and it's amazing how many producers, mix engineers, particularly starting out, overlook this, is the format that we're going to export it. So when we go to export our mix, we're going to make sure that it is to a WAV file. We're not going to export it as an MP3 because MP3s are lossy. We don't want to be using a lossy format. So we're going to set this to WAV. We're also going to export it at the native sample rate of what the session is. So as you can see up here, this session is at 4824. That's how we're going to export it. Now, if you do want alternate versions, that's a conversation to have with the mastering engineer and they will send them to you. So maybe you want MP3 masters. Maybe you want a CD master, which is going to be 44.1. Well, that's something that your mastering engineer will do and they will send you those versions that you need. Now, if you're a songwriter or an artist or a producer that's releasing music, then likely one of the biggest struggles you have is getting traction from those releases. It can be really frustrating and even deflating when you spend hours pouring your heart and soul into writing a song, spending money getting it produced, mixed, mastered, only to release it and it just falls flat. No one pays any attention, no one takes any notice, and it doesn't get any radio play, it just doesn't get any traction. Well, I've got a solution to this problem because I've created a 28-day release roadmap. This is the exact tool that I've used with all of the artists that I've worked with, even the ones that I'm working with right now. And this takes all of the guesswork out of how you should be promoting and marketing your song. It covers 2 weeks up to the release and then 2 weeks after the release. Too often, marketing promotion is an afterthought for many artists and bands that are releasing music. And by the time release day comes, if you haven't started that promotion, trying to get some hype building up to it, it's very often too late. You need to start this process much sooner. And best of all, this roadmap is completely free and you can follow it no matter what your budget is. So if you do have some money to put into marketing and promotion, then that's great. You can do that. But equally, if you don't, then there are alternatives that you can do using the free tools at your disposal. So if you like what I'm talking about here, check out the 28-day release roadmap. The link is in the description below.